Today's podcast includes pirates, bandits, sieges, all for you to use in your RPG campaigns.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys, I have a packed episode coming right up for you today. But first, if you could just support the podcast in some way, I would greatly appreciate that. Like, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you are listening to it. Those things help the show immensely. If you want to help the show out even more, you can support the show financially at patreon.com/dicegeeks. Also, check out my resource books that help you play better games. Amazon.com, DriveThruRPG.com, and my own website, DiceGeeks.com. Just search for the books of random tables. I have random tables, dungeon maps, everything you need to sit down at the table and to run an awesome session without killing yourself in prep. All right, now, guys, here's today's interview. My guest today is the writer and game designer behind the Molten Sulfur blog, Tristan Zimmerman. Tristan, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks, dude. Delighted to be here, as always.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully everybody knows by now that you come on to the show and we talk about real history and how to use those in your tabletop RPG campaigns. So today we have three incredible topics, and we're just going to jump in because these are big topics. So we're just going to jump in. So later on, we're going to talk about the siege of Cartagena. We're going to talk about bandits and an agricultural college. I almost said architectural, but we did an architectural feud a few episodes back, and that was awesome.
We did.
Yeah. This is an agricultural college and bandits. But first, we're going to tackle a pirate mutiny. And pirate mutinies, I assume there's going to be murder, treasure, adventure, the high seas, all of that stuff, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let's just jump right in. So setting the stage for you. The year is 1693. And there's this guy, there's this British member of Parliament named James Houblon. And he has this idea for a money-making scheme. And what he's going to do is he's going to take 4 ships and he's going to load them down with cannons. And then he's going to send them off. He's not going to sail with them. That's crazy talk. He's very rich and important and parliamenty, but he's going to send them off to the Caribbean, which during this period is a bit of a span of their cannons to Spanish forces there. So it's a little bit of an arms deal. And then they're going to try to do seabed recovery of treasure, because there's all these Spanish treasure fleets that were laden down with gold and silver and were sunk by hurricanes. And the gold and silver is just lying on the seabed. And Houblon thinks that he can hire people to raise the treasure up from the seabed, and everyone will get fabulously wealthy. And hey, if relations between Britain and Spain go south during this period, as they are reasonably likely to, this is during a period of European history where kind of all the great powers are perpetually at war with each other in ever-shifting alliances. Well, that's no big deal, because then you've just got a small armed flotilla down there and they can just turn privateer. They can essentially become legally sanctioned pirates overnight. Hey, if it happens before they're able to sell the cannons, so much the better. So he sees this as a great money-making opportunity. And in 1693, he puts out the word that this is going to happen. He's had ships, some of them specially constructed just for what he's calling the Spanish expedition. One of them is the ship called the Charles II, who's the king at the time. And the Charles II, she's a 46-gun frigate and is just remarkably fast by the standards of her time. She's this like super speed demon ship, and reasonably heavily armed to boot. And he puts out the word like, hey, Are you a sailor? Are you a better than average sailor? I want you. I pay good wages, significantly better than average wages. If the ships do wind up turning privateer, then you will get a percentage of all the prize money we take. If things go badly for you, I will look after your widows and children. This is my legally binding promise to you. And I will pay you every 6 months on the dot. And so, unsurprisingly, kind of all the best deck seamen in Britain said, sign me up. So they all go on board of these 4 ships. And they set sail. And before they sail for the Caribbean, they first swing by Spain itself, to the port of A Coruña, where they have to take on some stores and handle some paperwork. And the paperwork just sort of doesn't materialize. And they're sitting there at anchor for month after month after month after month. And there's no paperwork, and they're not going anywhere because they can't raise anchor until the paperwork is done. And people are starting to get restless. And then James Houblon back in Britain, Houblon is probably how he pronounces it, I don't know, doesn't pay the wages. He doesn't pay people when promised. And so the sailors circulate a petition, Mr. Houblon, please pay us our wages. And they send the petition back to Britain, and Houblon sends back word ordering that anyone who signed the petition should be thrown in the brig. And so that's not a great look. Yeah. And then the wives of these sailors back in Britain take Houblon to court. They say, look, it says right here, you're going to pay our husbands on this date. And, for us spouses back here in Britain, you will pay us their wages. And so we're here. We haven't gotten our husbands' wages. You are legally mandated, but Houblon's a member of parliament. He has a lot of pull. So when he goes to court, of course, the court rules in his favor. And Houblon at this point declares that he has washed his hands of the affair, that the Spanish have functionally taken the Spanish expedition prisoner, and that all those sailors are now wards of Spain, which really is not a great look as far as the sailors are concerned, many of whom at this point are now starting to fear that the Spanish are going to board their ships, take them prisoner, and sell them into slavery. And, things are going from bad to worse. And people back on these ships start to plan a mutiny. Now, a word about the leadership of the Charles II. Now, the Charles II is the lead and best ship in this little flotilla. Her skipper, her captain, was originally a just really well-chosen dude, a veteran seaman who had previously conducted a successful salvage operation off the coast of Hispaniola. Unfortunately, he died shortly after leaving Britain. And his replacement was an alcoholic with no real experience. The first mate of the Charles II was this guy named Henry Every, who was a very experienced mariner, about which relatively little at the time was known. And Henry Every, the first mate, starts to plan this mutiny. And he and many of his crewmates have heard stories of all of the treasure waiting to be plundered in the Indian Ocean, because the Indian Ocean at the time is full to bursting with trade and wealth between all of these Indian Ocean states, both in the Indian subcontinent and in Southeast Asia and along the eastern coast of Africa. I mean, it's a very wealthy area. And very few of those people are Christians, which means they're fair game for pirates. Christian pirates can go and do whatever because you can perform whatever atrocities you want against heathens, and it doesn't count according to God. So Henry Every starts planning this, and he gets a bunch of accomplices, and most of the accomplices are aboard the Charles II, but some of them are aboard a different ship, the James. And so in order for the mutiny to occur successfully, for Henry Every to take over the Charles II and sail off to fame and fortune and booty, they're going to have to get those co-conspirators from the James onto the Charles II. So on the appointed night, it's a moonless night. There's no moon. Every and his co-conspirators are starting to behave a little funny. And one of the second mates aboard the Charles II notices this, but kind of thinks nothing of it and goes to bed. Meanwhile, a mutineer rows over in a small boat from the Charles to the James and passes the password, right? The code word that tonight's the night, we're doing it, get going. And the password is that he asks whoever's on watch for, quote, the drunken bosun, close quote. Unfortunately, the person on watch who received the message was not part of the conspiracy. He got the wrong guy. And so this guy on watch is like, what? Like, no, the bosun is sober. What? And the mutineer who rode over to pass the message, he makes a critical miscalculation. And rather, what he should have done is say, oh, my bad. Sorry, wrong number. Let me go row someplace else. Not you. I'm definitely not from the Charles. There's not a mutiny. Nothing, no funny business going on. Instead, what he says is he thinks that the guy up on deck is in the know, but that he didn't pick up on the password. So he just is like, tonight's the night. We're doing it tonight. It's going down tonight. Doesn't specify what it is, but and then rows off into the darkness. And so the guy on watch, who I think is the first mate of the James, is like, okay, I think there might be a mutiny going down on the Charles. Like something funny's going on. So he goes and rouses the captain of the James, and the captain of the James is like, oh my God, it probably is a mutiny. Get a bunch of loyal men into a boat and row them over to the Charles so they can put down the mutiny before it starts. And they rush to one of the ship's small boats, the pinnace, to do it, but finds that the mutineers have gotten word anyway, right? That word has spread that somebody was asking about a drunken bosun. The mutineers have gotten the word, and they are already in the small boat, and they are being lowered into the harbor, and they are sailing, or they are rowing as fast as they can towards the Charles. The Charles and the James are close enough to one another, even though they are lying at anchor, that messages can be shouted back and forth. So the James shouts to the Charles like, oh my God, a mutiny is coming, do something. And so everything kind of gets rolling a little earlier than everyone anticipated. The James loads her cannons and fires 2 shots across the bow of the Charles, warning shots. They don't connect because that's the whole point of warning shots. And Every is forced to put his plan into action. This would be the prime time for the captain of the Charles to be like, haha, a mutiny, not on my watch, and put it down. But he is an alcoholic, and he is in bed, dead drunk. It is worth noting that the dead drunk is a bit of a supposition. We know most of this. We know all these very fine-grained details because the survivors of this mutiny were called upon to give testimony in court later. And so, you can tell where their stories, check where their stories line up. We have the transcript of their testimony that has survived. It's really interesting. And that testimony says, oh, he was sick in bed with a fever. But you can put 2 and 2 together, right? So he's out of commission. The suspicious second mate on aboard the Charles is woken up by the cannon fire from the James, goes up on deck, is like, hey, what's going on? One of the mutineers comes up behind him, puts a pistol to his temple and says, what's going on is you're going right back to your cabin, buddy. Like, you don't get to be up on deck right now. Henry Every has, by this point, he's everywhere, right? He's running everywhere. He's doing everything. He's managing everything. He's leading his mutineers. He doesn't have time to raise the anchors aboard the Charles, so he just cuts the anchor lines and raises and unfurls the sails and sails off into the darkness. And because this was all a surprise, and because there is no moon, so nobody can follow the Charles, and because the Charles is famously fast, faster than any other ship in this harbor, Every and his ship, the Charles II, are able to sail out of the harbor before the James can fire upon her for reals, and before the harbor fort at A Coruña can fire upon the Charles. Basically, before anybody's sure what's going on, Charles II and Henry Every are out of A Coruña, and they are sailing south, bound for the Indian Ocean. This poses a problem, though. By now, I should mention it's May of 1694. This poses a problem. What do you do about the folks who didn't participate in the mutiny? Every at this point springs the second mate from where he was being kept in prison with his in his cabin, says, "Hey man, we're turning pirate. Do you want to come be a pirate with us?" And the second mate tells him to go pound sand. He will under no circumstances become a pirate. Every is disappointed, but whatever. They finally wake the captain. The captain is brought up on deck. There's Every standing dramatically at the ship's wheel, and this windy, moonless night. And Every's like, "Hey, do you want to come be a pirate with us?" According to one person's testimony from the mutiny, Every even offered to give the captain his captaincy back. Right, like, "I will resume being your first mate, and you will resume being the captain. All you have to do is agree to turn pirate." But regardless of what the offer was, the captain turns Every down. And okay, so we've got these two guys. They don't want to be pirate. There are 15 other sailors who, when given the chance to turn pirate, decline. Most of the ship's crew, even those who were not initially part of the conspiracy, most of the ship's crew agrees to turn pirate. It's hard to know how much of that was people who were like, "Yeah, I'm genuinely enthusiastic about turning to a life of robbery and murder and worse crimes yet," and how many of them were just making the best of a bad situation, because it really was a bad situation. They were afraid they were about to be sold into slavery. They had no money. They were afraid. Those of them that had spouses were afraid that their spouses were going to starve back in Britain. So at this point, you've got 17 people who don't want to turn pirate. That's 15 crew plus the second mate plus the former captain. What do you do with them, right? Well, the standard pirate answer is you kill them. You cut their throats and you dump their bodies in the drink. Dead men tell no tales. If you kill them now, they can't do exactly what wound up happening, which is testify against you in court. And I don't remember if I mentioned this already, but the reason we know so many details about what went down is that we have the court testimony, both of the small number of pirates that were eventually caught and tried, but also of these of the survivors, of many of the 17 survivors. We have the transcripts from the court case. We'll get to that in a bit. But for whatever reason, Henry Every decides not to kill them. What he does instead is he gets out the ship's longboat and he lowers them down in a longboat. Now, a very important detail about this is when the longboat was lowered with these 17 souls inside, and I keep saying 17, let me just double check that that's right. I was right. So you've got 17 souls in this longboat, but there are still empty seats. There's room for more. And that winds up becoming very important in the trial later, because the prosecution uses it to argue that the men who stayed behind chose to stay behind. After all, these 17 men were permitted to leave. If you weren't in that longboat, and there was still room for more in the longboat, you chose to stay behind. Now, many of those men may have just been making the best of a very bad situation, but it's certainly an interesting argument. Anyway, so these 17 men are just they're let go. It's 10 miles back to the Spanish coast, which the longboat should be able to handle no problem, except that within minutes it is discovered there is a leak in the longboat. And the men in the longboat, they shout back to the Charles II, like, there's a leak in the boat, which is bad. Like, they will definitely not make it the 10 miles in a leaky boat. But once again, Henry Every has the opportunity to just leave these men to die, but he doesn't. He orders that a bucket be thrown to them, and a bucket is thrown to them. And with the bucket, they now have the ability to bail out their longboat, and they are able to make it the 10 miles to shore. And Henry Every and his crew sail off to commit just unspeakable atrocities across the Indian Ocean. And in the process of committing these unspeakable atrocities, they have what was at that point the biggest haul of any piracy, robbery, theft, whatever, in recorded history up to that point. There would later be bigger hauls, but up to that point, they were the most successful pirates in human history. Later, when they try to take their ill-gotten gains and disappear into society, eight of them wind up being captured. Henry Every is not one. He just disappears from the historical record. He's never seen again after he gets off the Charles II, which he rechristens the Fancy. State's evidence and are therefore with those two is you have the testimony at the trial, and the British government tries these 6 men for piracy. And we don't quite know what arguments they used because we don't have the transcripts from that trial. But the jury finds them not guilty. It seems likely that a jury of Englishmen decides that piracy committed against Indians and Somalis doesn't count, right? It's not really a crime. The British government is under a lot of pressure, and so turns around, takes these exact same people, right? The exact same defendants, the exact same witnesses, the exact same people, and hosts another trial, this time not for the crime of piracy, but for the crime of mutiny. And basically makes the probably the exact same arguments. This time the jury does find them guilty of mutiny. Of the 6 defendants, 5 are hanged. 1 is given a prison sentence. But as a consequence of this trial, we get just a remarkable level of insight into the minute-to-minute details of this mutiny. And to me, that's very interesting and very useful from a gaming perspective, because as a GM, I am a fan, and honestly, a bigger fan with every year that passes, of the idea of running scenarios rather than running plots, right? That you have just this really interesting situation that the PCs are thrust into, and then, hey, however it plays out is how it plays out. And what's really useful in this style of GMing is knowing what will happen if the PCs take no action whatsoever. You know the PCs are going to take some action, so this is not railroading. This isn't you planning out the PC's actions in advance. Just if they don't show up, how will things go down? And then that gives you a launching point from which to jump off and figure out, okay, they did this, so that changes how things will happen this way. And it gives you something to improvise off of, which is a really useful tool rather than just being like, things are happening, better improvise. And what's really great about this mutiny in particular and how it went down as a tool for improvisation is that it could have gone so much worse, right? Nobody died in this mutiny. That's astounding, right? How do you have a pirate mutiny that then leads to one of the bloodiest and most successful pirates in history where no one dies, where the worst thing that happens is somebody gets a pistol pressed against their temple? Which means that if that's what happens if the PCs don't intervene, there's real stakes here because the PCs can make things a lot worse without trying very hard, right? You intervene and you intervene badly, then things can get really ugly really fast. And I think that makes for high stakes, and I think that's very interesting. So yeah, the way I would use this at my table is I would have the PCs be on a ship or a starship or a sand crawler or some sort of self-contained moving thing. if you want to, you can have the self-contained moving thing be kind of held up by bureaucratic weirdness and the safety of everyone on board imperiled, as happened in the real situation. Or you can just have the mutiny happen, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to dress it up and offer explanations. You can just say, and there's a mutiny. And I think anybody who has seen Muppet Treasure Island will just immediately understand what's going on. But yeah, and then it gives you a tool to use for your improvisation of how the scenario plays out with the PC's actions.
Yeah. And I mean, as all of these situations that we talk about, I mean, this is just rich with different possibilities. And I think the idea of, like what you were just saying there, is throwing in a complication of, hey, there's a mutiny going on. What do? Do you try to stop them, or what is happening? And then seeing what the player characters do, because it can either, like you said, go terribly wrong, or, or just like the historical one, like nobody dies and they get off the ship or something. And then that becomes something else. So, I don't know. I thought this situation was quite interesting, because obviously there's a lot of jumping off points here. Because obviously if the PCs decide to fight back and it becomes violent, then you have a whole nother kind of set of, of situations and that can come right out of that. But I'm wondering too, though, if the player characters are, kind of roll with it and then they're set free by the mutineers. To me, that always you just created kind of like a recurring villain or somebody they can chase after, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like any way that this plays out that involves the mutineers getting away with the ship, like, ta-da, new recurring villain. And it's recurring villain where the players already have buy-in. The players are already like, oh yeah, we have established relationships with that Henry Every guy, or with any NPCs that you kind of feature in the scenario.
Yeah. And it's always interesting too, because you could, if it happens at the beginning of a campaign, if you're using a D&D like game or something, and you could say, the players' characters are like level 2, and somebody holds, a gun to their head or whatever, and forces them off the ship because they're like, well, we're level 2. We're not really strong right now. And then they get away. What are the players going to be like later on? They're going to be like, that dude held a gun to my head one time when we were level 2. We're level 14 now, right? Like,
I don't know a lot of players who wouldn't hold a grudge against that.
Yes, absolutely. So then once you're in that place, right, the work as a dungeon master or game master becomes super easy, because your players will be thinking about the game all week long and ready to jump into your session next time, because they got to find this guy who held a pistol to their head like 8 sessions ago or whatever it was.
That's the dream.
Yes, absolutely. And so, like, as always with these situations, I mean, there is a ton of stuff here. You can always, I'm a big fan, I'm sure of just taking little bite-sized pieces as well. You can always just take little bite-sized pieces out of some of these. You can say, oh, okay, so there was a leaky longboat. There was the guy on the deck doesn't know the password. You can take all of those little things too and kind of pepper them into some other situations. If you're running a game tonight and you need something, you can grab all kinds of little pieces. So I love the real history aspect to this, because real history just provides so many pieces that you can use.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Man, I mean, you could even do some of the trial as well. You could even use some of that. I mean, it's just awesome. But anyway, we are rambling again, and we have a lot of ground to cover. If that wasn't enough, right? I mean, that could keep a game master in kind of situations for a long time. But we're ambitiously going to try to cover a couple more here. Why don't you set the stage for the siege of Cartagena?
So Cartagena in Colombia the year is either 1739 or 1741, depending on when we jump into this story. But before we can talk about the Siege of Cartagena, which is an incredible template for sieges, and I'll talk more about that later. We first have to talk about yellow fever. So yellow fever is a mosquito-borne illness. It originates in Africa, but shortly after African captives, shortly after kidnapped Africans were brought to the New World as slaves, yellow fever came with them. The bug itself traveled in the bloodstreams of these captives, and the mosquito that carries it, because there's a very specific species of mosquito that carries the disease, came over in the water casks of these ships. And very quickly, yellow fever became endemic in the New World, and particularly in the tropics of the New World. And yellow fever has a really interesting pathology that makes it super relevant. If you catch it as a child, you are almost certainly going to survive. It's very unusual for yellow fever to kill kids. If you catch it as an adult, you've got as much as a 90% chance of death. It is not quite a death sentence, but it might as well be a death sentence for adults in a pre-modern medicine situation. So what that meant was Spain, as a colonial empire, was kind of unique in the New World tropics in that it had a large population of people who were born and raised in the New World, in what's called the neotropics, right? The tropical area of the New World. And all those guys who were born and raised in the New World, they caught yellow fever as kids, which meant that they were mostly unaffected by it. And critically, I can't believe I forgot to mention this, you can only catch it once. Once you have yellow fever, you are immune for life, forever, full stop. So all these guys catch it as kids and they are fine. But if you come over to the New World as an adult and you go to the tropics, what usually happened during this period that we're talking about is you caught yellow fever and you died. And it just sucks to be you. And that fundamentally changed the way that Spain maintained its colonial possessions in the New World relative to the other powers, because it meant that Spain built forts. And I want to be clear, this was intentional. At the time, nobody knew that yellow fever was a disease carried by mosquitoes. All they knew was that it was a disease that you got and it was bad. And usually it seemed to come with the rains. But everybody fully understood the effects of the pathology, and you get it as a kid and you're fine, and you get it as an adult and you die. So the Spanish built forts in the New World in ways that most of the other colonial powers in the Caribbean and in the neotropics writ large didn't bother building forts, because during this era, a fort only mattered if you could expect a relief column, right? You're in Holland or whatever, and you build a big, robust star fort to keep out the enemy army, because you are confident that before the enemy army is able to get into your fort, another army on your side can come around behind them and hit them in the back and scatter them and break the siege. That can't happen in the New World, right? It's too far away. By the time the only place a relief column can come from is Europe, and by the time the relief column gets there, the siege is already over. The siege has been over for months, because it takes so long for word to get across the Atlantic. It takes so long to raise an army. It takes so long for the army to get back. So for the other colonial powers, there was no reason to build a fort, because a siege, there's not going to be a relief army that comes to break the siege. The Spanish expected that they would have a relief army, and that relief army would come in the form of yellow fever, because all they had to do was wait out the invading army, because the defenders would all have been Spaniards who caught yellow fever as kids and were fine, where the invaders would have come from Europe and they were grown adults and they would catch yellow fever and die. And all you had to do was hold out long enough for yellow fever to devastate the people besieging you, and you win. And that's how it works. And the yellow fever winds up being the relief column that saves the day. So 1739, this is the beginning of the so-called War of Jenkins' Ear. The War of Jenkins' Ear is war number 10,000 in the interminable series of European gunpowder wars. They're all indistinguishable. They're the worst. And they're all pointless, right? They're all utterly meaningless. They're all being fought over minuscule territorial changes. They are a monument to the folly of man. And the Brits say, aha, this is our perfect opportunity. We are going to take advantage of this pretext. We are now at war with Spain, and we are going to seize Spain's colonial possessions in the tropics. Because they are enormously wealthy and they will be a fine feather in our cap, and we have coveted them for so long. So we're going to raise a big fleet, and we're going to raise a big army, and we're going to send them down to the New World, and they're going to take all this delicious Spanish lucre, and aren't we marvelous? They had trouble finding someone to lead this expedition because, again, everybody fully understood how yellow fever worked, even if they didn't understand it was carried by mosquitoes. And yeah, just nobody wanted to sail to the New World because they knew it was likely they would catch yellow fever and die. They wound up finding, as their commander, a man named Henry Vernon. Henry, let me double check that his first name is Henry. Edward Vernon. Edward Vernon is not an active member of the British military. He had been a captain in the Royal Navy 11 years prior, but he was a member of Parliament, and he had fought in the Caribbean when he was a younger man, and as a consequence had caught yellow fever and miraculously survived it. So he was immune. None of the sources explicitly call out that this is why he was selected, but boy, was it a great reason. And it's a great reason why, when approached, he would not have immediately said, absolutely not, you will never find me in the Caribbean, because he was already immune to yellow fever and he knew it. So Vernon, he's appointed Admiral Vernon, and he's given this great fleet, and he's given this army, and they sail off to the Caribbean, and the first place that they attack is Portobello in Panama. This is before there is a Panama Canal, of course. Portobello is the eastern end of a road that basically took the form that the Panama Canal takes today, right? Like you would pull your ship up to the Pacific side of the road, offload all your cargo, it'd be put on mules, carried over the mountain on mules, and then Portobello was on the Atlantic side, and it's the Atlantic terminus. Portobello was lightly defended. Vernon was able to take it, but he couldn't hold it, because it was in the lowlands where the mosquitoes are and where there's yellow fever. And he knew that if he stayed here long, his soldiers would start catching yellow fever, and that would be very bad. So he can't hold it. He's just taken it. Good for him, I guess. He destroys all the fortifications. He lingers just long enough to destroy all the fortifications so that if he does come back, the Spanish won't be able to defend against him. And he retreats back to Jamaica, because Jamaica has nice tall mountains, and high up in those mountains, it is too high for the mosquito. And while they don't understand that it's a mosquito, they do understand that people in the mountains in Jamaica just don't get yellow fever. So he bivouacs his soldiers and his sailors up in the mountains, and they're fine for now. Word gets back to London of this great victory. We've seized Portobello. They rename Portobello Road to Portobello Road in London. It's a big deal in London. Since we're talking about naming things, I'll just mention Edward Vernon is the man for whom Mount Vernon is named. Mount Vernon being the ancestral property of George Washington. George Washington's, I want to say, cousin or brother fights under Vernon and decides to name the family farm after Vernon. Anyway. The Brits are so enthusiastic that they say, aha, we're going to send you an even bigger army, and we're going to send it under the command of this guy named Wentworth, who has absolutely no military experience of consequence. But, I guess he's important. And so Wentworth comes, and Wentworth brings a big army with him, and Wentworth and Vernon say, all right, now it's time for us. We took Portobello. We showed those Spaniards what's what. Now we're going to take Cartagena. Now, Cartagena is in modern day Colombia. And it was at the time a major Spanish port in the Caribbean. It was one of the places that the Spanish treasure fleets left from. It was a big deal, and they were going to take Cartagena. The problem was that, well, I guess Cartagena didn't want to be captured, and it was robustly defended. First off, it was defended by a Spanish general and a Spanish admiral, the counterparts of Vernon and Wentworth. Let me just look up their names real quick. The garrison was commanded by a man named Sebastián de Eslava y Lezaga. He was the viceroy of New Granada and a career soldier. And the naval defense was commanded by Blas de Lezo y Olaberrieta. And I definitely mispronounced that, and I apologize. But Lezo is a career naval officer who, over the course of 21 battles, has lost one eye, one leg, and one arm, and is still alive and kicking ass. I would not want to mess with these dudes, particularly if I were Wentworth or Vernon, who, as we have been established, aren't necessarily the most qualified people on the planet. But they go after Cartagena, and Cartagena at the time is way, way back in this very long bay. It is not built like that today. The bay has silted in. So if you look at it, I mean, if you live in Cartagena, you're like, man, what is this guy talking about? There's not a bay here. The bay has filled in over time. But at the time, to get to Cartagena, you had to sail up this very long bay. And the bay was guarded with little forts all along the whole way, because the Spanish defense was, again, the point wasn't, oh, we just need to hold out forever. The point was, we only need to slow you down. The disease will take you from there. So if they had just built these single row of enormous walls around Cartagena, there's always a chance that something unlucky will happen and the enemy will make it through, right? There'll be a traitor inside who opens up the gates, or something like that happens, and the enemy will get through. Well, they didn't want to do that. In fact, Cartagena had just undergone a major renovation of its fortifications. And what it had instead is what today we would call defense in depth, a series of smaller obstacles, any one of which might coincidentally fall due to chance. But they're not all going to fall due to chance. That's not how randomness works. And taking each one progressively slows you down. So Wentworth and Vernon, they show up outside Cartagena. They've got this big fleet. Vernon lands Wentworth's troops. Wentworth starts going about, undermining and doing all this siege stuff on the pair of forts at the mouth of the bay. They're going after this pair of forts, and Vernon is able to support Wentworth with gunfire from the ships, right? Cannon fire from the ships. So Wentworth's got artillery support, but he's doing it the way you're supposed to, right? The way you would do it in Europe, slow and steady, sure of inevitable success, right? That's not how this works, because he's got a time limit, because already men are starting to fall ill with yellow fever. Because what's happening is, there are monkeys in the hinterlands that have yellow fever in their blood, because yellow fever infects monkeys just as well as it does humans. But monkeys don't die from it. Lucky fellas. And so mosquitoes are biting monkeys, getting the disease in their guts, and then they're biting soldiers on the beach and depositing the bug in the soldiers. And then once the soldier comes down with it, other mosquitoes come and drink blood from him, and he infects the mosquitoes, and then the mosquitoes infect his fellows. And as we have seen from the past 2 years, I feel like we're all very familiar with how pandemics work at this point. Disease spreads exponentially. Yeah. So on the first day, no big deal. A couple of people show some symptoms, but by the end of the first week, you've got some people who have progressed all the way through symptoms and are dead. And you've got a lot more people who are sick. And those people infect the people around them, and so forth and so on. It takes 2 weeks to take those outer forts. At one point, Lezo is thinking of just pulling his men out, saving as many men as he can. The defending force is far smaller than the attacking force. Traditionally, he would want to conserve as many of those soldiers as he could. But he says, no, that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is buying time. So he suffers greater casualties than he needs to in order to make it take as long as possible for Wentworth to take these outer forts. And when Lezo finally pulls out, he sinks some merchant ships in the channel in the center of the bay. To make it take even more time. And by now, Wentworth and Vernon have already lost, and they don't even know it yet because the fever is spreading in the ranks. And it takes time for Wentworth and Vernon to figure out how to get past these sunken ships in the channel. And they get into the bay, and the next big obstacle is this castle that they need to get past. They need to breach this castle before they can take Cartagena. And Wentworth goes to Vernon and says, I need more men. Can you spare some sailors? Just hand some of your sailors a musket and tell them they're soldiers now. And Vernon says, absolutely not. My sailors are dying just as much as your soldiers. I need every single one. I can spare you no bodies. And so Wentworth is now down on the beach, and his men are dying. And the number of dead, not only is the number of dead increasing every day, that's how linear growth works, the number that die each day increases, right? Mm-hmm. So more people die on March 20th than died on March 19th. And it's increasing exponentially. And by the time they have been in Cartagena for 6 weeks, it's do or die. Because it's becoming a mathematical problem, right? How many men, even if we were to crack the walls and get all the way into Cartagena, how many soldiers would you need to take and hold the city itself? And if you don't have that many men, there is no point in continuing. So it's do or die time for Wentworth to take this castle. And so he says, okay, we're going to do it. We are going to get some ladders. We're going to hire some local guides. And we're going to just go over the top of the castle. And this is a bad idea. So many men are going to die from doing this, but we have no choice. So they do it, and they hire the local guides, and the guides lead the soldiers astray. They take them the wrong direction. It's not clear whether they did it because they were loyal to Spain or whether they were just incompetent, but the effect was identical. And those few who did manage to reach the walls, they found that their ladders were too short. So even though they had propped their ladders against the walls, they still couldn't get over the top. And the Spaniards who the Spanish in the castle versus the number of Brits who are attacking, it's something like 8-1. Attackers to defenders, but the Spanish drive the British soldiers off with barely any casualties themselves, and then it's over effectively because by the day after, only 48% of Wentworth's men are fit for duty. So that's the total number of men he brought, minus the number who have already died and minus the number who are too sick to fight and are almost certainly going to die in a bit. Only 48% are still fit for duty. 5 days later, so that's 6 days after failing to take the castle, he's down to 26% fit for duty. He's gone from half strength to quarter strength in 5 days, because that's how exponential growth works. It just goes faster and faster and faster and faster. And they throw in the towel. The British throw in the towel. They get back on their ships. They sail out of there. They do what they did in Portobello. They take the time to demolish the outside forts, just in case they decide to come back for some reason. I would think they would have learned their lesson, but, just in case. Meanwhile, of course, fever is continuing to spread because the mosquitoes are in the water barrels aboard the ships. So just because you're back on the ships doesn't mean you're free of the fever. And in the process of sailing back to Jamaica, more men die, and it's still like staggering rates of death. And the final numbers that I want to share, between 1739 and 1742, because there were some reinforcements during this period, Britain sent about 14,000 soldiers. That does not count sailors. 14,000 soldiers alone. 71% of them died. Only 6% died in combat. Almost all the rest died of yellow fever. Of the core group, the ones who sailed from Britain first and thus were exposed to yellow fever the longest, their mortality was 90%.
Wow.
We don't have hard numbers for the British sailors. I guess Wentworth kept better records than Vernon did. But what we do have suggests that their mortality was comparable. Probably between sailors and soldiers combined, we are probably looking at between 21,000 and 29,000 dead, plus a grand total from disease, just from disease, 21,000 to 29,000, plus 1,000 from other causes.
Jeez.
So combat versus disease, you're looking at a ratio of about 20 to 1 or 30 to 1. And so it's worth noting, neither Vernon nor Wentworth ever expressed any like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't have done that for their actions. The two Spanish defenders, Lezo and Eslava, one of them died. He received wounds during the siege and died shortly thereafter, after the siege had already broken. The other went on to a very successful political career. They were both just showered with honors and medals by the Spanish throne, because it was an enormous victory. This tiny Spanish defensive force won against this enormous British invading army. But from a gaming perspective, what I think is so great about this is it is a siege with a countdown timer that accelerates. So what you're looking at is a series of small attainable goals, right? It isn't a single impossible nut to crack. How will the PCs ever handle this? Man, heck if I know. Good luck, guys. Instead, like, each of these forts is small. Each of these forts can be taken down by PCs who have, cool magic items or cool science fiction stuff, or just a lot of cleverness and a lot of skill with talking. Like, these are attainable goals for a well-played, well-equipped party of like traditional role-playing game player characters. But they have to get through them fast, right? They have to get through the outer forts fast, or whatever you wind up basing on the outer forts. They have to get through that castle fast. They have to get through Cartagena's walls fast. They have to get through the channel that has been blocked fast, or prevent the channel from being blocked in the first place. Because every single day that goes by, not only do they lose more men, they lose a greater amount of men than the day before. And the way I would do this is every single day of the siege, roll a number of d10s equal to how many days have gone by. So on the first day, roll 1d10. On the second day, roll 2d10. On the 17th day, roll 17d10. And that's how many soldiers on the PC's side die that day. And at a certain point, the PCs are, at first the PCs are going to do exactly what Vernon and Wentworth did, which is like, oh, this is trivial. Like, what do we care? And then at a certain point, they're going to say, oh, this is very serious. And they're going to have to start taking more and more risks. And they're going to have to start gambling more and more heavily. And if they don't gamble heavily enough, at a certain point, they will say, oh my God, we're still at plenty of strength. We still have more than enough strength to take the city, but it is now mathematically impossible that by the time we get to the city, that we will still be able to take it. And so it is an accelerating countdown timer to complete the series of interesting, discrete, attainable goals. And I think that is just a really, really interesting way to run a siege.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's outstanding, really, because, we all know, you can ratchet up the tension by saying you have 24 hours to complete the mission or you're all dead or something like that. So this just takes that to another step. And I assume you could do this with almost anything, right? Instead of yellow fever, you could say it's radiation or it's some kind of magic thing or something like that. So you could kind of take it a number of different ways, right?
I would say that there's two tricks to it. Number one is it has to be something that impacts the attackers, but does not impact the defenders.
Yeah.
And of course, you want the PCs to play the attackers because the attackers are taking an active role, and playing an active role is more fun at the table than playing a defensive role, a reactive role.
Just wait for 3 weeks in game time. That's
exactly like just keep rolling to see if somebody shoots you. Like, that's the game. So it has to be something that impacts the attackers more than the defenders. It has to be something that increases exponentially. And personally, my recommendation as a GM would be it should be something that the PCs are immune to. And this is where you just hand wave it and say, hey guys, just FYI, all of your characters contracted yellow fever when you were kids. And if you want to, you can shoot me a short email with like one paragraph about how it was that your character came down with this disease. But of course, you were a child, and so you survived it. Or if you're doing radiation or something like that, it's, shoot me a short paragraph about how it was that your character came to be injected with the super rare nano machines that make you immune to radiation, that all the other people you're with can't have. Because in my opinion, and I recognize this is not a universally shared RPG opinion, but in my opinion, disease as something to affect the player characters is super boring. Because what is it? It's just like, okay, roll a Constitution saving throw or be less effective. And, oh, sorry, you rolled badly. You're dead. Like, that's not interesting. That's not a fun story. I put a lot of work into this character, and you're just going to kill me because I failed a couple of rolls? Like, that's dumb. And so just don't do it. Like, find a convenient excuse why the PCs aren't impacted by yellow fever or your yellow fever analog.
Yeah. And I'm sure if you made a Reddit post about handling disease in an RPG, you'd probably start a holy war of some kind between different opinions in that. But I tend to agree. I think as a complication or a resource kind of drainer, they're pretty fun. But like saying, Ragnar the Great died of dysentery at level 18 or whatever is kind of like, well, that was a buzzkill, right? Like,
yeah, it's pointless. It's like, this is not, I did not play Ragnar the All Slayer because I wanted to have a story about him dying of essentially random chance, because boy, that's something else that I feel like we've all learned during this pandemic, is that disease has a huge element of chance to it in real life. Like, you can take all the precautions that you want, and you're a lot better off. You're a lot less likely to get the disease. You're a lot less likely to have an adverse outcome. If you haven't gotten vaccinated yet, please go get vaccinated. But at a certain point, we all as role players understand you can always roll a 1 on a D20. That's just how math works. Yep. And that's not an interesting story. That is generally not the sort of thing that we want to tell in our escapist fantasies.
Yeah, and I think if I think it could possibly work if you were playing like a more realistic game or something like that. But I don't know anybody who's playing like a pandemic game right now. Because
boy,
we're done
that's
with
true.
It. We're kind of done with that. But I could see if it was a realistic game, but although even using the word realistic is not exactly what I mean, like a more grounded, I guess, kind of
that's
game.
A good word.
Because if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, or you're playing some sci-fi game that has kind of very prominent heroic elements, dying of a disease is not fun. Even if you're doing a Star Trek game where they usually get infected with diseases like every 8 weeks or so, the red shirts would die, but the doctor gets the cure, right? The doctor is going to get the cure, because if your whole starship crew dies of a disease, your players are probably will say the same thing you just said. Well, that was boring. Why didn't we why didn't something cool happen instead?
And actually, that's a terrific point. I'd like to dig into that a little bit if I can,
Sure.
Because you're right. Star Trek uses disease plots on the regular.
Yeah.
But look at how they use the disease plot. It's never about, hey guys, did you know disease was bad? Like, yeah, man, I'm a human being. I know disease is bad.
Yes.
It's always to provoke an interesting choice, or to show something interesting about the characters, right? Like, Worf just came down with this, super weird blood contagion that that we have a cure for, but that Worf says that Klingon honor dictates that he can't take this particular cure, right? There's something about this cure that means that it is dishonorable for a Klingon to take it. And now Worf is comatose in the med bay, and Dr. Crusher has to debate internally whether her greater duty to the patient is to save his life or whether her greater duty to the patient is to respect his wishes and respect his bodily autonomy. That's a really interesting question in ways that did Worf die of the disease is not interesting. Or similarly, in Deep Space Nine, there's a really cool disease episode where Dr. Bashir comes down to a planet that's being stricken with disease. And he's like, I'm young and I'm brilliant and I'm incredibly handsome. And, I can cure this disease. And the locals are like, man, a lot of people have come through here claiming they can cure the disease and they are all dead now. And he's like, but, I'm Mr. Siddig. I'm great at things. Don't you worry. Big fan of Dr. Bashir, by the way. And then he catches the disease and he's no closer to the cure. And now he's like, oh no, my hubris is going to cost me my life. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm not, the great, brilliant, all conquering doctor that I think that I am. Maybe I'm just a schmuck with delusions of grandeur. And of course, fine, in the nick of time, he solves the disease, but it's really interesting to see that character moment of a character who's kind of been defined by his unconquerable sense of his own invulnerability. That is not a story about will he die of the disease or not. Like, that is an element, but that's not really what the story's about. Yeah. I think that disease stories in the question of will the PC survive or not are boring and we shouldn't do them.
Yeah. And each time I was thinking as you were mentioning those, right? Like those kind of the Star Trek examples, they're always going to get the cure at the end, right? Or the show's over.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, and I know some people would say that was, be anticlimactic or whatever, but we kind of just know that, Dr. Bashir is not going to die, right? We kind of just know that.
Because that's not what the show's about.
But that's not what the show is about. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. That is exactly what I was going to say. The point is to push you into thinking about things maybe you didn't think about before, right? And so I think that is exactly, kind of like what you're saying there. And then also I was just thinking back, kind of ticking off some episodes in my head, remembering back to Star Trek. Not that I have watched Star Trek so much that I know, episodes, by heart or anything. That would be foolishness.
Yeah. Crazy talk. Who would know that?
But actually, yes, there's quite a few. And what they do is I've noticed that they do use it as a timer a lot of times, right? It is like, hey, we got the cure. Actually, it starts at the episode. Hey, we have the cure, but oh no, it's a race to get the cure to them. And guess what? Q shows up and he's going to distract us. And guess what? This is going to happen. It's going to distract us. But like millions of people will die if we don't get the cure, or the crew is going to die if I don't get this cure, but I can get the cure. But oh my gosh, all these things start happening and I'm being distracted from them. And so using the disease as a timer or as a complication to something, I am totally for that. But if randomly your 14th level rogue can die of the flu, I don't that one doesn't get me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was a long digression. And now, and we are like way over time, like already. We have still like one more situation to talk about. But we didn't even really analyze. I kind of derailed it there with the Star Trek topic, which I usually do derail many conversations once Star Trek, once I think of Star Trek. Because that is a very interesting situation with, they can really push players into a different place because do you really push this attack so far that you're going to let like so many of your soldiers die, right? Like that's an interesting question.
Yeah. And to me, that's what's so abominable about Vernon and Wentworth never expressing any remorse. They went to their graves never having gone on record as saying like, maybe we shouldn't have done that thing. Mm-hmm. And then for George Washington's brother or cousin or whatever to come home and be like, boy, that Edward Vernon guy, what a swell dude. I'm going to name my family estate after him because I look up to him so much. Like, what? This guy is a bad person. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Very complex situation, but it can definitely, I think, really push players to think about some complex issues, and just to make some choices, even if you're playing a pretty light, relaxing game. I think after the session would be over or something, people would be like, hey, wow, that was pretty intense. That was that made us think about, how important is this attack, right? Or how, what are our objectives here? I think that's really cool.
Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Well, we were going to talk about another situation, which is, shall I say, bizarre, Tristan?
Yeah. So before I get started, how much time are you comfortable allotting to this? Because this is one of those topics where, like, you can go infinitely deep into this. It's okay. Interesting all the way down. So how much time?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it would be like a 15-minute treatment, but if we can't do a 15-minute treatment, we could put it in our pocket and we could do another episode with it.
Let's see if we can do it in 15. All right. So it's okay. I'm looking at the clock. All right. So the year is 1924, and the place is Guangzhou. Guangzhou is a city in southern China. It's in the Pearl River Delta. It is near Hong Kong and Macau and Shenzhen. And it is to this day, and going back way long time, one of the great cities of China. And in 1924, Guangzhou is home to an American missionary school. The school is located on one of the islands in the Pearl River, and it is a school operated by American missionaries. And kids come over on the ferry every day, or maybe there's a boarding school component. I'm not sure. And they receive a Western education. Now, this is contentious in the period because China is in the middle starting to come towards the end of a period that today is called the Century of Humiliation. I am not sure if the term Century of Humiliation is current in 1924. If it's not yet quite current, it is about to be, and it will be used by both communist and anti-communist forces. Today, it's the phrase is primarily associated with the communist government of mainland China. And the idea of the Century of Humiliation is that China has just had a really bad previous century. And to be blunt, most of that badness is due to foreign powers, due to the interference of foreign powers in China. And critically, in 1924, the Chinese population is aware of that fact. They are aware that things are bad. They are aware that things could be a lot better and should be a lot better. And they are aware that this is the fault of foreign powers. And this is, they have been aware of this even at the level of like the lowest, most humble farmer. They have been aware of this for almost a century, frankly, judging by the timing of the Boxer Rebellion. And so Chinese school kids going off to receive a Western education is contentious because there is an enormous amount of anti-foreign sentiment. And again, not without reason. One of the teachers at this school is a man who went by the name of Daddy Groff. Daddy was not his real first name. It was his nickname. Why you would go by Daddy as a nickname is beyond me, but he did.
Ask Puff Daddy or whatever.
Yeah, I guess. What am I to say? But Daddy Groff had a degree in agricultural science from Cornell. And he was part of a new strain of American Protestant missionary thought that felt that the route to the soul of China was through the stomach, right? And that America had all of this agricultural knowledge, and if we can share the agricultural knowledge with the Chinese farmer will say, I guess those Americans are pretty swell dude. I am now interested not only in Christianity, but in the specific forms of Protestant Christianity that are practiced in America, because the people who taught me farming also want to teach me about Jesus. And that was Daddy Groff's attitude. And so he had this kind of farming add-on to the missionary school that he thought of as an agricultural college, or even as an ag extension. And that is a reasonable term for the era. Of course, we still have ag extensions today. They're very important. They're run by local governments and by universities. In 1924, the United States Department of Agriculture had been running ag extensions in the U.S. for 10 years. But we already talked about why Chinese folks might not necessarily have wanted to learn agricultural techniques from Daddy Groff. There is an additional really interesting wrinkle to this, which is that America had a lot to teach China about agriculture. China had a lot to teach America about agriculture, and neither side's knowledge was actually relevant to the other. And there were a number of reasons for this, but the biggest one was farm size. Following the conquest of the American West, Americans were accustomed to enormous farms, which they ran in 1924 with increasing amounts of mechanization and the use of chemical fertilizers and chemical herbicides and things like that, all of which massively increase your per acre yield, which is super useful when you have hundreds or thousands of acres being tilled. In China, farms were tiny, sometimes as small as half an acre. What on earth is a farmer cultivating half an acre going to do with a wheat thresher? What is he going to do with a tractor? What is he going to do with expensive chemical fertilizers? Instead, his knowledge, which was incredibly highly developed, was in micromanaging every square inch of your tiny plot in order to squeeze the most yield out of it that you can. And that is incredibly useful knowledge that an American farmer with 100 or 1,000 acres has no use for. So Daddy Groff wanted to share all of this agricultural knowledge that he had from Cornell, and nobody was kind of interested in it for both nationalism reasons and for practicality reasons. In 1924, some bandits came along and kidnapped a bunch of students from the missionary school and from the agricultural college. Basically, they boarded one of these ferries, dressed as, and I'm quoting Daddy Groff here, ordinary Chinese gentlemen, close quote, whatever that means. Once the ferry was in the stream, they revealed themselves to be brigands, and they took over the boat and they sailed it away upstream and sent back a letter saying, hey, we have your kids. We demand several $1,000s per student for the return of these hostages. Now, this is where another important figure enters the picture. This is a man named Li Fu Lin. Li Fu Lin is the governor of Guangzhou. He's the governor of the city. Li Fu Lin is a senior member of the Kuomintang. The Kuomintang is a political party which in 1924 is very powerful in southern China. It maintains a rival government to a government in the north of China run out of Beijing, which is run primarily by a loose coalition of ever backstabbing warlords. The Kuomintang is in kind of on-again, off-again conflict with the Beijing government. It's an on-again, off-again conflict with other bandit warlords nearby. The Kuomintang during this period has a really complicated ideology that we do not have the time to get into, but it is probably not the Kuomintang ideology you are thinking of. Li Fu Lin cannot, he's the governor of Guangzhou, he cannot have people kidnapping students in his city. That is unacceptable. If he develops a reputation as a sort of governor under whose watch this sort of thing can happen, he will be replaced. He will be replaced in a heartbeat. The Kuomintang, the KMT, is in constant political turmoil during this time period. People are being replaced left and right. Also, the Kuomintang is not on great terms with the communists during this period, but does actually include a large number of communists because Chiang Kai-shek has yet to have them executed. Anyway, I think it was Chiang Kai-shek. Anyway, whoever ordered that execution. So Li Fulin has to do something about this kidnapping, but neither can he risk coming across as too pro-foreign, because center of humiliation. And if he comes across as too pro-foreign, then he's probably going to be replaced, because that's very unpopular. And the Kuomintang's hold on power in Guangzhou is not necessarily very strong. And the KMT cannot tolerate having a weak or unpopular leader in Guangzhou. So he has to thread a very fine needle in order to get these kids back. And he succeeds, but it's a big win. It's a big win for the Kuomintang. It's a big win for Li Fulin. It's a big win for Daddy Gruff. It's a big win for everybody except the bandits, but who cares? They're bandits. And what Li Fulin does is he doesn't get in touch with the bandits. He gets in touch with the heads of the villages in the countryside where the bandits have fled to. And he basically says, look, if something bad happens to these kids, I'm going to hold you responsible. Not necessarily clear what that means. Does that mean he's going to hand out summary executions? Does it mean he's going to hand out fines? I don't have an answer to that question. But the local village heads took it pretty seriously. And of course, they were locals, so they had contacts with the bandits. The bandits were members of local families. The local village heads were able to be like, hey, we're going to reach out to you through your families. We're going to apply social pressure, and the bandits coughed up the kids, and everything worked out okay. But I think that this is a really interesting scenario, particularly if you provide a reason in your fictional setting why Li Fulin cannot get involved, right? Maybe war with one of the local bandit cliques or one of the local warlord cliques has just flared up, and Li Fulin is called to the front. He cannot be in Guangzhou. So I guess it's up to the party to figure out what to do with this. And now it's up to the party to thread that needle very fine. In your fictional setting, if you cannot, if anti-foreigner sentiment doesn't necessarily make sense, that's fine. Make it be a religious sentiment. People don't like whatever religion your version of Daddy Groff is here on site to sell. People are very suspicious of it. People don't like it. People are suspicious of anyone who's too close to it. So your PCs still have to thread that needle of, you have to get the hostages back. You have to get the kidnapped victims back. But you can't do it in a way that makes you look too friendly to the missionary school. And I think that's a really fun needle to thread. And I have done it in 17 minutes.
There you go. That was really good. And I do think
12 minutes.
12 minutes. 12 minutes. You did do it in 12 minutes. That is awesome. All right. So I think that is an interesting situation where, you make it so that the governor can't involve, and you force the party into kind of that into that role of trying to figure out the situation. But I just found this whole situation very strange, with kind of it being based around an agricultural college and, bandits and, some of the different political pressures in that. I guess I always think of what, I guess just making the world so real that the players don't just go, well, we just kill everybody, right? Like we need to get the kids back. Okay. We just scorch earth our way up to where their hideout is and then take the kids back.
And something I think that's super fun about this particular scenario is that's a totally viable strategy. You can absolutely scorch earth your way all the way to the kids, murder everyone you come in contact with. Hooray, we've rescued the kids. Sure, some of them were executed by the hostage takers in the process, but what's life without a little sacrifice? And then you get back to downtown Guangzhou, and you present Daddy Groff with his students, and he's just like, anyway, they're throwing us out, right? Because you acting on our behalf have just murdered a whole bunch of people and burned down a whole bunch of farms. And there's a mob with torches and pitchforks outside, like, oh, I can see them coming over on the ferry now. Look at that ferry. It's all lit up with torches. And yeah, it's a delicate situation. And let's say maybe you handle it super well, right? And you use diplomacy and you get everything back. And maybe you even use the same strategy that Li Fulin used in real life. Well, Li Fulin's going to roll back, or your version of him in your fictional setting is going to roll back and say, guys, I appreciate you making the hostage taking situation go away. That's great. I can't afford to have hostages. Why did you have to make the foreigners look so good? You made the foreigners look very competent in that you got these guys back for them, and you did it without any, like, that's no bueno, guys. Like, you can't do that. Now we're enemies because you didn't thread the needle right. You went too far one side instead of too far to the other side.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a very interesting situation, and you can definitely do that. But I mean, even just like the base elements, like I was saying before, are right there. Just hostage taking,
ferryboat,
like being able to sail it away with hostages on it. I mean, that's like perfect. Just having, and then just adding all the other elements of a foreign component with, against a native, a native culture and different, things like that. I mean, it's just, it can just really, it just adds layers and layers to it. So I think it's a ton of fun, because then, and being a ferry boat, right? I mean, that can be it can be a moon shuttle, right? It could be the shuttle that takes the students to the moon, and the bandits fly off with it to Io or something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It imports into any genre setting real easy.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we covered again all the time at the end of these episodes. I say, like, if this did not give dungeon masters and role players stuff to do, they should probably find a new hobby, because we have filled, we have given so much information today. These situations are so rich that you can pull all kinds of scenarios out of them. Well, Tristan, before I let you go, though, why don't you just remind people where they can check out your books and games and your articles and all that?
So head over to moltensulfur.com. I'm also on Twitter at Molten Sulfur. I'm on Facebook. Search for Molten Sulfur Press, or just Molten Sulfur on Facebook. And there, what you find is, first off, the Molten Sulfur blog, where I put out content just like this every single Tuesday. If you like RPG content drawn from real history and real folklore, like Molten Sulfur blog is your place to go. And also you can find my tabletop role-playing game, Shanty Hunters, where you play as characters collecting magical sea shanties in the year 1880. And that's available for sale at moltensulfur.com, both in PDF and print on demand.
All right. And as always, I will be sure to drop links for your blog and Shanty Hunters into the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who is listening right now can head over there, just follow those links, and you will learn more about Tristan's writing, some tons of history, and also you are able to check out his RPG. All right. Well, Tristan, it was a pleasure to have you back on the show again. I look forward to having you on the next time so we can talk about more cool stuff. But thank you for joining me once again.
Oh, always a joy.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tristan today. As always, Tristan came with some bombs that you can drop into your campaigns and take your RPG, D&D, tabletop experiences to the next level. If you want to learn more about Tristan, if you want to read some more fascinating articles, if you want to see the games that he creates, head over to dicegeeks.com right now. Find the show notes for this episode, and you will see links where you can learn more about everything RPG related that Tristan is up to. And guys, it's a lot, and it is all worthwhile. All right, now, if you want some free stuff, you're going to head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You just type that into your little browser window, and you will find 20 free dungeon maps, a custom 5e character background, some more tidbits that I keep secret, so you just have to go there and check that out for yourself. Also, you'll never miss an episode of this show, and each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in this wild world of Dice Geeks. All right, guys, it is a privilege to come to you each and every Wednesday, and I thank you for spending some of your most valuable time with me and my awesome guests. Thank you so much, and until next Wednesday, keep gaming!